Hey, thank you for joining Human Capital Gains. Guest on this episode is Scott Roslyn. Scott is the CEO of We Are Bill, an alignment company. Scott, it's great to have you here.
Great to be here. Thanks, Jay.
So tell me about We Are Bill. I think our listeners would love to hear you.
Yeah, so there's always a good story behind the name itself, but the story behind the company, We Are Bill, is a 10-year-old brand strategy and innovation consultancy. We come in at the moment of creation and reinvention. And rewinding back to 2015, when we first conceived the idea, there was a moment where, venture-backed companies, private equity-backed companies needed to define who they were. It was a little bit more crowded in the landscape. And you have a product, you have a team, you have potential, but how do you tell the story? And so we help teams do that, identify who they are, what makes them tick, what makes them unique, and how to convey that in the world to ultimately drive commercial value.
That's fascinating. When you talk about like VC and PE backed companies, where do you feel they are with their identity?
Yeah, I think so often, and whether it's VC or PE, different moments in their life cycle, so different scenarios they're each facing there. And I think both struggle to say who we are, partly a function of you want to build the product and you want to nail that, and you want to ensure you got the right people in place and you got to invest there. But ultimately, we find there's a catch up that starts to happen is the product looks a certain way, the service is a certain way, but the story that exists on the site or perceived out in the world is a hindsight. It's a look back. So I always say websites are lagging indicators of a company's potential. Well, you want to ensure your brand and your perception in the world is as close to the reality of today, or if not the vision that you have of tomorrow. And so oftentimes there's an elevation that's required, a refinement. Maybe there's also some letting go of what's not serving them anymore that they were in some earlier form. And so that's the work that we do. And the reason why outside is it's hard for a team to take time to do that, or maybe they don't have the talent in-house to do it, or at the very least, they're not able to see beyond who they have always been or who they see themselves to be. So we spend a lot of time with insight, a lot of time gathering external perception and even us being that outside vantage point to suggest how they need to evolve to become their best selves.
Yeah. We see that especially that like inflection between VC and private equity, right? Where sometimes the company has become something other than the founder had envisioned, right? Sometimes there's some difficulty there catching up with a new vision and understanding that new identity that the company's actually become, right? I would imagine when it comes to working with founders and CEOs in that way, that you're doing a little bit of therapy.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, identity is a funny word to use because so often identity is thought of as a logo, and we see it as the broadest definition. If you think on a personal level, a human level, identity is oftentimes so much more than a professional identity. It's who we are as people and what makes us
Right.
tick and what do we have in our past and what do we have in our future and how are we living in a very aligned way around that. And so it ends up being quite therapeutic. And especially if it's a young company, the brand is their baby, the company is their baby. And we come in and hold that very delicately and also honestly, right? Like how can they perform at their peak potential if we're just telling them everything's great? So we come in and we support them, but also as a partner, we're pretty honest and transparent about what they need to do differently if they want to really get to the next level.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And explain to our listeners the We Are Bill a little bit.
Yeah, so we are Bell the name. Yeah, we're winding 10 years now. We started thinking about who we wanted to be. And I think that's healthy for any company. Start with values and mission and purpose and just a very, very clear perspective of who you are uniquely to your competitive landscape, not just from a product standpoint or a service differentiation. And so for us, we saw, having worked together at a past company, there was an opportunity to be really relational and really human and work very hand to hand with our clients. So almost as close proximity as possible while being outside of their organization. We also thought about simplicity as the greatest solution in design and frankly in strategy. So simplifying the complex. And then we thought about people leaning on us in times of challenge and times of pain. And so we thought of the song Lean on Me. I thought of Eric Ries and the Lean Startup, having just read that and been a big fan of his. But this idea of like being a lean new consultancy in how we modeled ourselves, but also that moment to have folks lean on us. And so Lean On Me, the song came to mind, and Bill Withers as the sole musician behind it. We said, well, what if we called ourselves Bill? I'll never forget, we laughed, actually. We laughed for a series of conversations over a series of weeks because it seemed crazy to call yourself a name, let alone a name that's as common as Bill. And yet we said, like, that's it. Like that's actually what we're all about, is that humanity and that proximity and that simplicity, and almost like the neighbor or the uncle, that you love. And then we thought, well, there's Bill Withers, but then there's also all these other Bills and Williams and Billies, Bill Murray in comedy and Bill Shakespeare in literature,
Right.
and Billie Holiday in music. That's what we do, is we help to create these characters. They're just coming to us. We're an empty vessel, and we're helping them to be the greatest in their own domain. And it took on a life of its own, and kind of a universe. And of course, people would show up on calls and say, like, you're Scott, and my co-founder's name is Chris. Who's Bill? But it's always about, like, that's
Yeah.
the spirit. That's the environment that we want to create.
Yeah, I love that. I love that from the work that I've seen you do too. I think it really like embodies the spirit of how you approach these businesses. How was the reaction to the work that you've done, taking that unique, very intimate take on brand and identity? Did you find that you needed to get people to where you were looking to take them, or were they coming to you because that's the type of consultancy that they were looking for?
Yeah. So a few thoughts. Is a wonderful question. So I'll break it down maybe a bit. So first, I think the way that we behaved started to embody the types of clients that we wanted to attract, right? So we put out a certain energy and a certain approach, and then we began to attract that level. Now, the interesting thing that happened was people saw our high growth company work. And at that time, and I think still true today, many large companies want to act small, and many small
Right.
companies want to grow big.
Yeah.
And so we had global companies, literally some of the largest brands and most well-known and recognized and respected companies in the world, coming to us looking for that nimble, entrepreneurial, agile, hands-on, and part highly strategic and insight-led and almost business-minded, with deeply creative, design obsessed, and where those two come together, yet in a boutique brand consultancy models. We started to attract companies like an AB InBev coming to our door after just a few years of being open. Brooks
Yeah.
Brothers, a recent client, Aston Martin F1, and Xerox. So we started to attract global brands that were looking for that nimble approach, and yet very human and very hands-on and hybrid mindset. We oftentimes talk about. The other is just in terms of how we were attracting them, is we're strictly referral driven. So jumping on a podcast like this is as much marketing as we've really ever done. We've actually never really submitted for a design award. And we found, like, let's people come to us because they know somebody, or they see a quality of product themselves that they've come across, and they're looking for that. But very under the radar, and kind of maintaining that human connection and that proximity throughout.
Yeah. It's almost like there's power in that secrecy, right?
Yeah. And two, I'll say, I mean, you guys might relate to this, is we decided to not grow big, but rather be great. So having like a magic to the clients that we work with. And so we're very selective in who we take on as clients and the number of engagements that we'll do in a given year, just because I think there's a lot of different ways to run agencies. That was just one that really made sense to me, right? Let's ensure that there's a super high quality and a super, hands-on, very high touch premier experience that someone's feeling when they work with us. We've even had clients say things like, it felt like we were the only company that you were working with at the time. That's the level of focus. And I just think it's the right way to do things. It just managed for me personally. That felt really true to how I wanted to run.
Yeah, I think that's a valid point, because I really do think, you can only go so big until you start to dilute your brand to a certain extent. So to be able to return that trust in a meaningful way, I think is a huge indicator of the quality of work that you put in and the importance that you put on those relationships.
Yeah. The other piece, absolutely. And I'll say it's treating them with such empathy and awareness, but also we're working across sector. And we think that that's a superpower. So I'll say, well, what's your domain? Like, where do you guys really play most? Is it CPG? Is it consumer more broadly?
Right.
And we've taken on global enterprise clients in like the most technical, high tech, like literally companies building engines that are going to space.
Right.
We've worked with them as well as stuff that will be on your grocery store shelf. So
Yeah.
there's a certain level of like honoring their complexity and unpacking that and helping them to feel that we are really capable of the detail and the nuance and the deep level of just difficulty that got to building something as specialized as they have. And
Yeah.
then ultimately how to convey that story as wonderfully as possible, as uniquely as possible, and potentially even to new audiences that never have heard of that really, kind of wild, complex business model. But it lands to a CFO and they say, oh yeah, that's worthy of an investment,
Yeah.
right?
So tell me about how breaking down that complexity led you to your next venture.
Yeah. So I think, well, man, I mean, I believe life is simple. People make it complex oftentimes, but also we're complex human beings, right? So there's a level of, I'll say like whole person, like sort of, like a lens that I apply, which is, and this is it's so important to do. I think is we all have stories. We all like carry stories with us, even in our daily interactions with people. Who someone really is as a professional, well, that's just part of them. Who they are as a person back in their home or in their family or in their social life, like that's also the whole person. So what I found was the work that we were doing as a brand transformation consultancy was really critical. It was helping to companies to define their story, define their reason for being, define their purpose and their mission and vision, and then articulating that and then living that, breathing that. And that was moving the dial for a lot of folks. And we really try to measure as often as humanly possible where our work has led to significant outcomes. What I started to see in working with C-level individuals is there was the brand side of what they were building, but then there was also the human side of what it felt like to be an executive in a high performing organization, leading a team, metabolizing change and transition as companies grow and evolve and change, and even the landscapes around them change, which of course we've seen with incredible focus in the last 5 years in particular, but going back many cycles, many business cycles, is what's the potential for not just brand transformation, but people transformation and
Yeah.
culture transformation inside of these complex organizations. And so that it sort of happened accidentally, to be honest. Someone reached out and said, you do corporate brand development. Have you ever thought about the human development or the people development side? Effectively, they were saying, have you ever thought about coaching?
Right.
And it's something that I considered to a degree, partly because I was under the umbrella of you do branding. Have you ever thought about personal branding?
Right.
And I have a lot of thoughts on that phrase. But ultimately, humans in transition, teams and organizations in transition, I've been there myself. I've been through moments of really hard transition, whether it's in a professional way or in a life way. And I was like, if I can be of service to someone on experiences that I've had and things that I've seen, ways that I've done shadow work, self work over the last 25 years, if that can be of value to someone else, maybe that's the greatest thing that I can do with my time. And so
Yeah.
that's what led to Alignment in the company launching last year.
I love that. I was fascinated when we talked about it, that alignment, pun intended, of the work that you've done with brand brought you here. We do a lot of work with workforce transformation. It's why this podcast is called Human Capital Gains, because it's really about getting the most out of your people. It's where most businesses are failing right now is when there is failure is that they're not bringing their people along in a meaningful way. We see it with digital transformation all the time, and AI is just this accelerator. So, like these AI transformations, 95% of them are failing because they're not bringing their people along. And it's
Mhm.
not just upskilling or reskilling people, it's making them feel trusted and validated that, like, this tool is there to help them and not replace them. Right. And I see a lot of parallels between that and what you're doing.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think we're in a moment of change and a moment of significant shifts, like tectonic shift that's happening.
Yeah.
And I think it's easy to bucket it into like, well, what AI is doing. But I think this has been happening for years, that
Hmm.
just how we embrace tech, utilize tech, what happened when remote was sort of everything that people talked about. Would companies go back into offices or not? The human capital side is really about, well, yes, productivity, but also does a worker feel like they are living to their fullest potential in
Right.
order to be productive? And there's a lot of great writing out there on that, whether it's Oliver Berkman and 4 weeks, something to get to 80 years of life, right? We only have
Yes.
such a fixed time, but how do we actually spend our time? And then there's time management and energy management. So I'm really fascinated by these topics, especially being in a creative field, but running a company and then seeing what it's like to be an executive across the table, and having been on that side and knowing how challenging that can be. So I think what's happening with AI is it's really causing people to look at, well, what is the value of work, and what is the value of my work, and what is self-worth in a workplace, and then how to evolve. I think adaptability and evolution, reinvention is a big word, but I'm on like version 7.0 of myself on Strava today. I literally like, this is what I was as an athlete then. Here's how I evolved. Here's how I evolved.
Yeah.
Here's how I evolved. And that's how I tag my runs and my rides. So same as a professional, I think we always should be reinventing, kind of like
Yeah.
reassessing what's next for me personally. Yes, professionally, but for me personally, to feel like I'm doing
Right.
my best work.
In person, professionally or personally.
Oh,
It's
it's
just
fun.
tasks that we're doing, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And in fact, I think when we bring ourselves, now I'll say some people choose to have a certain persona at home and a certain persona in the
Hmm.
workplace. And that's totally a personal choice. But to the degree that there's alignment of those, and there's a
Right.
person feeling like I am who I am, and this is the type of character that I'm showing up as, and the type of excellence that I set my standard as, that's, I think, where people can live really full
Yeah.
lives, rather than feeling like they get to a point and now they feel completely unfulfilled. They might have achieved, professionally on paper, it looks like they're, the mark of success, but they feel completely empty.
Right.
And so that's where there's some misalignment that could have happened, or is currently happening for an individual or for a team, right? There's just not
Yeah.
cohesion. There's not a sense of kind of true interplay of all the
Right.
pieces that need to make someone as fulfilled and successful as possible.
As you've added in this coaching surprise so far.
Yeah, one of the huge surprises when folks get to the highest level of an organization, we're talking publicly traded companies, and they're the top seat. Sometimes it's very lonely, and maybe even oftentimes it's very lonely. There's imposter syndrome that we all face, but even at the highest ranks, and having people that they can turn to, and like really strong, trusted, safe, high trust spaces to
Yeah.
share what's on their mind, and that could be in a professional capacity or personal. But as we just said, like those definitely overlap. So that's been a huge surprise, and frankly, I think it signifies what's needed for people to sustain at that level, or even get to that level in the first place. Is we think that there's a certain set of rules that we follow in order to achieve, and then we realize at a certain point in life that what got us here, maybe he's not going to get us there. And there's a new
Right.
set of rules and a new set of tools that we need to build. And maybe new questions that we need to be asking ourselves in order to thrive at that level.
Once had a successful CEO tell me that the one thing that he needed to realize is once he became CEO, everybody was lying to him at some point.
Because in that seat, but it's the only thing they want, right?
Right.
What they want
Exactly.
are people who are not gonna just tell them what they want to hear. And I think that's true at so many levels, but especially at that level, especially when the stakes are as high and the pressures as high. Yeah, we all can't see entirely. Like we can't take in all the information, process it fully, and know as an individual. It takes a team. And yeah, that's so true. That's so true.
Where do you see your focus most of the days between your two ventures that are bringing those two endeavors together more and more?
Yeah, I see that there's so much overlap between the two. When I'm
Yeah.
talking to folks about brand, I see culture and people. I'm talking to people about people and culture, and when it does feel like therapy on the brand side, on the human side. So there's so much healthy overlap that I'm seeing. I think it's just different slices of what I'll call a transformation,
Yeah.
right? Different ways to look at growth and fulfillment and achievement and change. And change is really scary. And then we see that there's some teams that embrace change with like wild, curiosity. And I think that's maybe the word that's at the center of both at all times. Just me being curious, the folks I work with being curious and open, just open to new possibility. So yeah, there's so much overlap and interplay that it's kind of fun.
We come to a close on this. What's one parting piece of wisdom from everything that you've done through both of your companies?
Yeah, I think we think that success and winning looks, when it's all said and done, like it was all meant to happen that way. It looked effortless, maybe even to some, and just all of the failure and all of the struggle and all the pain that goes into getting to that place. That's where I say it's not success or achievement, it's fulfillment. Feeling truly fulfilled. We're gonna feel like we're falling down in order to take that next step up the mountain. Yeah, if you're feeling like you're failing or you're feeling like it's a struggle fest, it's you're probably heading in the right direction. I always say keep going, and things will reveal themselves if you're being true and clear and aligned within yourself. It's the right direction to go.
When you're stumbling, Bill will always be there to lean on.
I'll be here. Give us a ring.
Scott, I
Hey,
really
thanks so much.
appreciate
Great questions. Yeah, thank you.
really
Yeah, so wonderful and nice to chat.